in its simplest form, like, why shouldn't you think about Agile as a cost savings tool, right? Well, the problem is with thinking about Agile as a cost savings tool is that most of the organizations that we walk into are legitimately 10x oversubscribed. I mean, it's absolutely insane what most organizations are being asked to do. You go through and you do this kind of annual planning cycle, and you have all this stuff, and you have all these objectives and OKRs and all this different stuff, and you're trying to run it through an organization that just is not capable in reality of being able to do that. So a lot of times the challenge becomes is like what do you do when you legit need to save money? But the problem is that you're super overloaded, right? So just to kind of give you guys a little bit of a hint of I think where this is going to go, is that the right conversation, I believe, is that what we have to focus on are things like throughput, getting things in market as fast as we can, making sure that we're focusing our delivery dollars on the highest value things we can possibly do, the things that are most likely to yield return on investment, things like that. And if you can do that with the existing staff, that's great. And so, but sometimes, we're out of balance. And so sometimes it's like redeploying staff and getting people into the right seats, or getting some of the wrong people out and some of the right people in. And so there's a big efficiency play. But like cost savings is like really, really difficult to promise. And so what I want to talk about a little bit to start off with, I was kind of hypothesizing the previous hour, like how would I start to tell the story to you guys? And so where I thought I would start are what I kind of see as a few anti-patterns. So there's a belief, right? There's a belief, it's almost like a Dilbert-esque belief that Agile, just by virtue of doing Agile stuff, right? So by virtue of doing Agile process, that we're going to save money, right? So our challenge is to unpack a little bit why. But as we do that, right, this belief is pretty pervasive, right? So it's almost like if I send you to Scrum training and you start doing the Scrum ceremonies and you start having the Scrum roles, right? So we'll do a daily stand-up meeting, right? That kind of a thing, right? Then somehow that's going to magically like solve the problem. And so what we see in practice, right? The simplest thing is that we have this hypothesis, this belief that that Scrum is going to save us this money. So we train everybody on Scrum, and then we do like really crazy things like fire all the project managers. Or we get rid of all of the architects, right? Because Agile doesn't do architecture. That's not true, but that's like what a lot of people think, right? Or we realize that we think Agile is going to flatten our organization by default, so we let go of all our middle managers or something. I mean, you guys might be laughing on the inside, or maybe you're cringing because you've experienced it, but people do stuff like that, right? And so what ends up happening is you have this big, complex organization that hasn't really fundamentally gone through a transformation, full of dependencies, lots of orchestration costs to try to deal with those dependencies. You teach that organization Scrum, and then you remove all the costs associated with orchestration, but the dependencies and things like that are in place that necessitated that orchestration didn't actually go away. Right? So it's like we spend the dollars to teach people Scrum, right? And then we save the dollars by letting people go. And we end up on the backside, not with cost savings, but with a more chaotic environment than we had before. People get frustrated, say Agile doesn't work, right? So they throw Agile out, right? But the reality is that Agile wasn't the problem, right? We prematurely tried to reap those benefits before we had created the ecosystem where those benefits could be realized, okay? Another thing that we're seeing, and I'm going to anchor this back to a talk that I think I launched in the market about 8 years ago called Why Agile Fails. But another thing that we're seeing quite a bit with some organizations that we're going into, usually like a lot of times we'll follow behind another consultancy or something like that, or maybe it's a failed Agile implementation and they like our approach to trying to figure this out. So we come in behind somebody in one of these things. And a lot of times what happens is that somebody decides, and I don't know exactly what I want to call it, but somebody basically decides to create some sort of like greenfield pilot, right? So they do this, right? So they go on and they say, okay, we're going to do something in a totally new business with really open requirements. We're going to give it total autonomy over the tech stack. We're going to give it a total dedicated team, right? All this stuff, right? They're going to basically create like all the conditions for Agile to be successful. And they're inevitably doing it in something that's built on new technology, mobile, web, right? Some distributed system kind of architecture, things that really lend themselves to service orientation, right? All that kind of stuff. And so we're going to do a pilot, right? And that pilot's going to be really fast, and it's going to be really efficient, and it's going to use some variant of Scrum, right? XP, Lean Startup, right? Something like that, right? So the hypothesis is that because we used the methodology, that is what drove the efficiency and the savings, right? The reality is that it was actually the new business, open requirements, ownership of the tech stack, continuous integration, deployment, good architecture, dedicated team. These were the things that actually led to the efficiency play, right? So like what we're seeing is that like an organization will come in here, and any organization has some percentage of new stuff, right? Innovative, fast stuff. And then organizations have some percentage of legacy stuff. And so what'll tend to happen is you'll carve off a piece of this and you'll do your pilot, and it will work really good, right? Because we know Agile works if you create the conditions to do it well. And then we'll say, oh, okay, so we'll take that hypothesis, we'll come and we'll train everybody else on Scrum, and we will cut 25% out of the staff. Right? Well, the reality is this legacy stuff, we didn't create the conditions to get those efficiencies. So what we end up doing is we have this really shining star example of something that worked, and we have this really bad example of where it didn't work. Okay? So going back to the themes, right? Some of the physics stuff, right? If we don't create the right levels of encapsulation, if we don't figure out how to break dependencies, we can't alleviate the orchestration costs. Okay. And so we save the money, but we don't get the organizational improvements we want, right? So that's why I think this is like a really, really dangerous conversation to have.